I have no idea who messed up. It was either Razer or it was Newegg, but this thing showed up to buy on Newegg, and it is definitely not released. Quick edit real quick. Obviously, at the time of you watching this video, the device is out and available to purchase. I shot this video like 2 weeks ago before leaving for Japan, and then, well, Japan happened, which is where I'm at right now. So just know that while you're watching this video, you can't actually buy this thing. That's all. Itakimasu. So I swiped it, I bought this thing, 150 bucks, and then I tweeted about it, and immediately the link went down. Razer hasn't tweeted about it, it's not on their website. This was definitely a mistake, but I'm not under embargo. I bought this thing myself, so let's take a look at it. I have a surprising amount of good things to say about it, a couple bad things, and then just a couple of, I don't want to say weird things, quirky things. We'll get into those. But let's just dive right in and talk about the Razer Stream Deck. I mean Razer Controller X. Whoops. I know I'm across the world right now, but it feels like home. Because I'm about to tell you about the one-stop shop, the one-stop shop for all your stream aesthetic needs. I'm very excited to tell you that we are once again sponsored by Own.tv as our stream design company. So if you haven't visited their site in a while and you're looking for some spiciness to add to your stream, I recommend you check out the link below and check out their best sellers first. Some of these have been around since the last time I've talked to them, but they've become staples in the system here. Ones like the Dark series, the Minimalist series, the Modern series. I remember talking about these, they're great. And they're complete overlay packages for streamers. Or if you're looking for something brand new, check out their Just Added section. Spaceship and Reactor are brand new 3D designs hand-drawn by a designer and then animated. But on the off chance that none of these float your boat, just hang out for a second because Owen and I are working on something really cool. Tune in for some, I don't want to give away any spoilers. It's cool stuff, just know cool stuff is coming. In the meantime, use code SENPAI to get 50% off anything in their store right now. Back to the video. So let's get some first impressions of this thing. And actually, I'm gonna be real, the first impression was the best part about it. I like how this looks and it feels. It's got a nice heft to it. It's not like cheap plastic. I like the design. I'm gonna hold it so that camera can see it. It's nice and like modern and sleek looking. I like the boxy look. I like that it's magnetized. I like that it's a detachable USB-C cable. I like that the front plate that I'm assuming you're gonna be able to customize is also magnetized. That's a nice touch. But the big thing that I actually really like about it is the feel of the buttons. They're a little bit crispier. The button travel is shorter than the Stream Deck. I'm obviously gonna be comparing this to the Stream Deck a little bit because that's what this is. Let's call a spade a spade. The edges of the buttons are a little bit sharper. It just makes the buttons feel a little bit less gooey than the Stream Deck. I feel like everybody watching this knows what I'm talking about, right? It's just a surprisingly satisfying press. It's a little thing, but also it's not a little thing, you know what I mean? And I have very great news for you, because when you plug this thing in, the worst thing about Razer products is the first thing that happens. It tries to install Razer Synapse automatically. So you start to install it, and then what it does is halfway through the installation, it installs the Loupe Deck software for you. Now, here's a surprise. You don't actually need Synapse to run this. Probably the best news of this entire video. You guys know how I feel about Razer Synapse. But you can actually cancel the Synapse installation and instead just download the Loupedeck software. And that's all you need. It works. Thank goodness. Now, it's been a good 2 to 3 years since I last tried the Loupedeck software and absolutely hated it. And I'm happy to say that it is, I think the word is navigable. It's not navigatable. Navigable? I think a good word about it would be tolerable. You spend a couple minutes on it and it is very quirky. They did some weird stuff that I can never understand. But after a couple minutes of kind of figuring out the quirks and realizing how it all works together, it is tolerable. But it does most of what a Stream Deck does. I tweeted out earlier, what do you use your Stream Deck for most? And the top answers were obviously controlling OBS, using third-party software, so like video editing, which really that's just being able to set hotkeys, right? And match them to whatever software you want, whether it's Photoshop, DaVinci Resolve, any of those things. People controlled Discord a lot, they controlled Spotify, and then they controlled a lot of home automation, for example, hue lights or like if this then that. And this does all of those things except for one. I was really surprised they don't have any kind of Discord plugin for it. I kind of figured that would be like a top priority for Loupedeck, get that out there first. And I did think it was kind of funny that by default, this center, I think it's a center button, is the Discord icon. But when I go into it, all they set that button to do was open discord.com. So a little bit misleading there. There's no Discord integration in this thing. But let's dive into the software. I want to show you real briefly how this works, and then I want to show you some of the weird quirks I ran into along the way. For the most part, it works a lot like the Stream Deck software. You have the icons on the left, you have all of your tools on the right. They're laid out a little bit differently. They're obviously trying not to make it a completely perfect clone of the Stream Deck, but you can see the categories on the left. You have OBS, you have Streamlabs, and then like you've got this button at the top which looks like a settings-ish button, but really it's just a way to turn off and on which categories are shown in the list of categories. It's clearly trying to have feature parity of the Stream Deck, like basically copy and paste the features, but like we're making it our own, and so they make it, it's just not as clear what things are. I ran into an issue early on where the Loupedeck software wouldn't connect to OBS and I couldn't do anything. And next to the OBS icon was like a yellowish orangish circle and it said, can't connect to OBS. Click here to learn more, which took me to a help page on the Loupedeck site and it said, if you have a red dot, do this. But I didn't have a red dot, I had a yellow dot. And it didn't say anything about yellow dots. I was left to just kind of figure it out on my own. It turns out the Loupedeck software still isn't compatible with OBS 29. That came out 3 months ago, which is probably the biggest red flag out of this whole device. Like, if you can't keep compatibility with the main streaming software 3 months after its release, how big is your dev team and how more of these problems are we going to see in the future in terms of compatibility? So I did have to install OBS 28.1.2 and it solved the problem. And you can see if I click OBS, I've got a folder of scenes that shows you all of your scenes when you click the down arrow. Again, obviously trying to be on feature parity with the Stream Deck, but like, we gotta make it different. And so it's different and it's not as pretty to look at, but it does the same thing. And if you set it up once and then forget about it, then it doesn't really matter. But then it just kind of works the same as the Stream Deck. You find the function you want it to do, you drag it onto the button that you want it to do, and then it does that thing. And I feel like I've been using this word a lot, but it does it a little quirkier. Let me show you some of the quirks. For example, you can see right here at the top, recording toggle. And like, it's not confusing. Toggle, it's probably toggle starting and stopping. That makes the most sense, but why didn't you just say start, stop recording? Or this one, set OBS toggle on off. Why do you have toggle on off on this, and what even is set OBS toggle on off? But yeah, and all the other OBS actions, if you hover over them, it gives you like a blurb of what it does. But when you hover over set OBS toggle on off, it tells you nothing. It's just weird. Like in that sense, it just kind of feels like Razer software. Like for something as simple as controlling OBS, I spent way too long trying to figure out what each function actually did because it wasn't clear from the get-go when it could have been. On the left side, you can see those little reordering dragging dots, and when you hover over it, it gives you like a dragging hand, but you can't reorder anything. But you can also just drag it over to the button from anywhere on there. So what are those for? Another quirky thing, by the way, I'm gonna keep calling them quirks. Another quirky thing that's kind of a good thing, but also kind of a bad thing at the same time, is that they made anything you can think of a button. For example, there's a whole folder of rotate display buttons. There's a regular rotate display button where every time you click it, it rotates the orientation of the buttons, which is really cool. I like that. But then there are specific degrees. For example, if I want it to permanently be rotated 90 degrees clockwise, I can drag that button on there. And then if I click it, it rotates at 90 degrees. But if I click it again, it doesn't rotate it another 90 degrees. It's more of a set the display to be rotated 90 degrees. And just to push the point further, if I drag the turn display 270 degrees, you can see it'll rotate it all the way around to 270 degrees clockwise. But again, it's a one-time thing. If I want to change it back, I have to drag the reset rotation onto that button and then press it, and that's the only way to change it. That feels like it shouldn't be a button. That feels like it should be a setting, or at the very least, just have the rotate display button. I don't see the value in the specific degrees if you can't change it without making another one-time press button. They have this other folder at the bottom called Stored Device Actions, and I'm not 100% sure what that's for. Like on some of the actions, instead of dragging it onto a button, I can click on it, adjust some settings, and then hit save, and it saves it to that folder, and then I can drag that onto the button. But if I instead just drag the action onto the button, I can't then drag it down into the Stored Device Actions button. It just feels very inconsistent and kind of useless. Almost like there was a brainstorming meeting of like, how do we add a couple features the Stream Deck doesn't have, but they didn't like do the follow-up meetings with how to do it properly. Hold on a sec, I gotta fix this rotation, and in order to do it, I gotta drag another button onto there and then click that button. Let's do the reset display button. There we go. But speaking of all the unnecessary rotate display buttons, they have a button for everything. In the operating system tab, there's a folder for date and time, and you can drag the week number of the year onto a button. So this one right here just displays week 14 all the time. If you didn't know, we're in week 14 of this year. Now you know. Like, I don't know who at Razer needs to hear this, but it is possible to have too many options. I don't think anybody needs that. Another thing that bugged me about it is, even though they have all these options, they kind of limit a lot of your freedom. For example, at the top, you can see that there's the device options and then there's a profile options. Again, very similar to a Stream Deck, but it's nice. You can have different profiles based on what you're doing, and then you can actually set it to automatically switch based on the application you're in. It's called dynamic mode. So I can have one screen for streaming, and when I open up OBS, it automatically goes to that. Then I can have another one for editing, and when I open up my editing software, like let's say I use Premiere, it automatically switches to that. But right now you can see I don't have any Premiere actions in there. They don't exist. The only way for me to access those is by opening up a Premiere specific profile. Meaning if I want to have a catch-all page that has a couple scenes, a couple of my favorite editing shortcuts, a couple desktop things, I can't do that. I have to be on an Adobe profile. I can only access After Effects actions if I'm on the After Effects profile. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't know why they do that. Now, I would normally like to give the benefit of the doubt that, well, this is an unreleased device. Maybe that's something they're gonna add in before they were planning on releasing this. But this is the software for all the Loupedeck stuff, even the stuff that's already released. Like, this is their currently usable software. So there really isn't any excuse for stuff like that, or the fact that it still can't work with OBS 29. I guess at the end of the day, it kind of all comes down to one thing. Let me share my final thoughts on this device. Does it work? Yeah. And I feel like the majority of all of us, the way we use our Stream Deck is it's set and forget. You put the buttons that you want on there, you never open the Stream Deck software again, at least for another couple months, and you press the buttons. So if the software is not as clean, if it's not as user-friendly, does it really matter? Not as much as other things. The build quality is nice. Again, I like the way the buttons feel. Also, I didn't mention that this bottom rubber thing is like slightly adhesive. So it's very sticky to a desk if you're into that. But I have two problems with it that I want to address. The first is that the user experience, as I showed you, just isn't as easy. A device like this is meant to be customizable. Every time you change something on your stream or you get an idea, you should be able to jump into here and without even thinking twice, be able to set up your buttons. The software should be as out of the way and simple as possible. And I know with a device like this, if I have to change something, the first thing that goes to mind is, oh, I really don't want to open up this software again. I'm gonna have to relearn how it works and find the weird things in the settings. And on some level, it's going to deter me from going back in and changing things later, which is not how a device like this should work. That's kind of typical for Razer. Their hardware is fine, but their software is very subpar. The second problem is probably a little bit bigger, and it's kind of an overall problem with Razer. This device, at the end of the day, brings nothing new to the space. It is Razer taking a look at a 3 or 4 year old product that is successful and dominating and saying, I want a piece of that pie. Let's make our own version. They didn't add any great new features. They didn't make it easier. They didn't provide any value to the streaming space. They just made their own Stream Deck. We've talked about other products that they've knocked off on this channel. And it could have been something really easy. Like they could have filled in this gap with like a USB hub. That would have been really cool and would have provided great value to the community, but they didn't do that. And on top of that, it's $20 more expensive than the Stream Deck, which you can get for $130 on Amazon right now. Now that doesn't actually hurt the experience of someone who bought one of these. They're basically buying a Stream Deck, but branded differently, slightly tweaked, and $20 more. But instead, to me, it's more of a signal of how much I should trust a company to take care of me in the future. If I'm gonna buy a device from a company, do I wanna buy a device from a company that's innovating and trying new things and pushing the envelope and seeing what more value they can provide to content creators through their updates and through new devices? Or do I want to buy a device from a company that's copying and pasting and not updating their compatibility for months? If I'm going to jump into an ecosystem, I'm going to pick the first one. But that's just me. If you haven't hit the like button yet and you're still watching, please make sure to hit it. You obviously like the video. You're still watching. And share with me your thoughts down in the comments down below. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, happy streaming.